often before like a big day of severe weather, you get the sense that the moisture in the atmosphere is building ahead of time. If we're going to have widespread severe weather, supercells with threats like tornado, hail, wind, these big squall lines, you get a lot of moisture pushing up into the area. And often the day before, kind of in the same risk area, whether we're storm chasing over in the southern or central plains, whether we're over in the Midwest, there's like some electricity in the air. You get the sense the atmosphere wants to do something mean or violent. I was kind of standing outside yesterday in central Illinois trying to gauge whether I felt that, magic, for lack of a better word. And my feelings were mixed. In one sense, earlier in the day, it was pretty dry in Illinois. We've in a drought right now, actually in an extreme drought technically. But later in the evening, I noticed these clouds starting to push up, and you can see the satellite loop at the end of the day. This moisture pooling kind of here in the Mississippi Valley. And you're seeing some of that back build into Texas as well. I'll kind of replay this clip. Kind of watching those cumulus clouds underneath some of those high clouds. We had some storms yesterday, in fact, in Mississippi, Alabama, some storm reports with those. But you can see this kind of cloud shield just building all the way up into like the Ozarks, all the way into Illinois and Indiana. That likely continued overnight. It's hard to see those low clouds without the visible satellite. We're going to get the sunrise here soon. You can see it kind of peek through my window here. So really curious to see. There's that sunrise. How many of those low clouds are building back up in the middle part of the country? Because that's the moisture source. That is the kind of fuel that's going to push ahead some of these thunderstorms today, and it's increasing the risk, right, for some of those more damaging, severe type of hazards. Now, if we just look at the dew points here plotted this morning, the wind trajectories associated with those, you can see that building action out ahead of time. Now we're the morning of the event. We're no longer like the day before or the eve. And that moisture is building up into this area here. I often do this experiment early in the morning. I look, just where my brain sees the moisture fluxing or coming in, most aggressively. And you can kind of see this line here across, like, let's say northern Missouri, kind of drawing a line from like Kansas City toward like the Quad Cities of Illinois. You can see that moisture just cranking up into that area as well. You can see another kind of little detour here. It's taking over in the hill country of Texas, and then this other piece that's coming up here. And those kind of nicely highlight the areas of severe weather that we're watching most closely today. Now, this low here, currently over central Kansas, is going to push east. In fact, there's a warm front. It's actually kind of a stationary front, not really a warm front here this morning, stretching through Iowa, Missouri, up into northern Illinois. And that low often tracks, its forward track often is right along that quasi-warm front or stationary front. So we're going to see that today. That low is going to track toward the northeast, and the severe weather risk is going to translate to the east along with that here. Now, the Storm Prediction Center has been eyeing this for quite a while. They've been very consistent on this. They have an enhanced risk out here this morning. Curious to see how and when they'll update this today. I have question marks as far as if I think they're going to go up to a moderate, which would be 4 out of 5, but certainly the risk is in place for a widespread risk for severe weather today. And that slight risk, we can see plenty of hazards within a slight risk. We saw, Eric just mentioned the damaging EF3 plus tornado that struck Michigan in a marginal risk, right, in that kind of dark green shading. So wide area watching for severe weather today from like Detroit, Indianapolis, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Norman, down through the hill country of Texas, over toward even portions of West Texas, and then up through the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, and many of the areas in between as well. Now, I will say there are kind of two risk areas we identified, right? That northern Missouri one, and then that low stretching through kind of central Illinois, north central Illinois, up near the Chicago area. And this other one, let's call it like the central and west Texas risk. This one down here, a little bit more hail originated. That's where that threat's coming from. And the Storm Prediction Center highlighted, their highest intensity for hail. So watching for damaging hail, potentially maybe even like later into the evening and overnight, pushing through the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area and some of the other metros to the southwest there. Now, I'm not ruling out, tornado and wind threat as well. Likely to see some supercells developing potentially into a squall line later in the evening, and we can see tornado threats materialize with that as well. But the kind of focus more so for tornadoes is up in Illinois, just thanks to that front that I mentioned that sort of has been acting like a warm front over the last 24 hours. Now it's kind of this morning being modified by the lake-cooled air from Lake Michigan, which still has ice on it. And that's going to probably turn into something of a stationary front as the system comes through later this evening and focuses, potential tornado threat right along that near I-80, maybe areas to the south of that. If we go look at the upper levels to see what's kicking this off, stirring things up in the jet stream, it's kind of an interesting two-pronged low. We have this almost cut-off low across the southwest. That's kind of a common area for those. And then this deeper, I'll call this a long wave trough because you can kind of see it dipping all the way down across North America here. And those are kind of teaming up together to pump this moisture all the way from the Atlantic and Gulf up in the middle part of the country, and that's prompting the severe risk. What's kind of curious about these are still pretty far back. I mean, this one here this morning, all the way over here, like the Baja, this one somewhere over, like, let's call this Utah or Idaho. And the system getting kicked off is well out ahead of it. So it's not like, it's this big, low with a squall line right along the trough, so to speak. It's kind of way out ahead of it, and that's putting some question marks if there's going to be enough kind of juice or kick in the atmosphere to kick off some of those earlier storms, I think, in northern Illinois. I'm pretty confident Texas show is going to begin on time and in a big way because the proximity to West Texas with this cutoff trough, I mean, it's right there on its flank. Plenty of kick in the upper atmosphere, if you will, but this long wave trough is still a ways away from, like, I mentioned Chicago and Detroit. So this area, I think, overnight, certainly going to be convecting, heavy rain, thunder, potential wind threat as that finally kind of translates off of the Rockies. That's much later. I think if we're going to see kind of a big tornado threat in that area, it would likely have to kick out way ahead of that trough. And there's always question marks trying to produce, like, big thunderstorms, supercell thunderstorms without that upper level kick in place. Just a question mark I'm watching today. Want to double back some housekeeping items. Just looking at the last 24 hours of precipitation, I mentioned those storms across the lower Mississippi river valley. Some of those rainfall amounts pretty impressive, up near 2+ inches. Portions near Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, over toward northern Mississippi had some severe reports as well. You can see this rainfall over here in the Pacific Northwest. Much more is on the way for that area here as some shortwave troughs. We're going to be targeting that over the next kind of 4 to 5 days. We'll look at that in a moment. Jump over and show you the current dew points here this morning. I'll make that valid here as of about 6 a.m. near the recording of this video. And like I said, that moisture that's been pushing up overnight, we can't see those low clouds, but I can imagine they're percolating, and they're going to start to bubble here this morning across a wide area. You can see why the Storm Prediction Center drew that large slight risk area with all the moisture that's now pushed up into the middle part of the country, all the way over toward northwest Ohio, all the way down through Texas. And we're going to be watching this throughout the day today. I'm going to play this forecast forward. You can see the moisture even pooling along that stationary front, being modified by that lake cooled air from Lake Michigan. And this is kind of that corridor we're watching in the afternoon to see if any supercells go, because if they do, this environment is primed for severe weather if any of those storms go during the daylight hours. Overnight, as we get further into the evening, now 6 p.m., you can still see that front stretching all the way back toward Texas. Even have some activity now in West Texas, that dry line pushing to the west, kicking off storms there. I push this all the way out to 10 p.m. and see storms now kind of showing up in that dew point depression that shows up there. And still kind of waiting. It's all the way 10 p.m. now from the 3-kilometer NAM, and I can see some storms trying to form here, western Illinois, central Missouri. I'm just kind of seeing their shadow in the dew point. And then overnight, pushes through. That cold front pushes to the east tomorrow, and then finally off the kind of eastern seaboard as we go into Thursday afternoon. It's kind of always cool to see. Jump over here, go to the 3-kilometer NAM, and then the dew point. How that moisture kind of pools and then just gets pushed out of there by these systems. You can even look closely. All these little speckled dots, those are lakes, keeping the moisture relatively higher in this very localized area. The 3-kilometer NAM actually has that in its analysis where all those little lakes are. It can impact the local weather. Kind of neat. All right, jumping up big picture, looking at the 500 millibar vorticity here this morning. Again, I'm going to make this, let's push it all the way out to 7 p.m. this evening on Tuesday evening. And this shows you what I'm talking about. The Texas event that had that enhanced risk up through the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area overnight, there's plenty of kick from the shortwave now coming off the Baja over northern Mexico, like the Chihuahuan Plateau here. Kind of a common presentation for some of these severe weather events down in Texas. But remember, I was talking about this afternoon and evening in this corridor here, and you're really asking for anything to kind of show up here in the upper level height maps to say, hey, something's going to kick those off. And I just don't see it right now. That wave is still back here over Wyoming. Now, if the risk area was here over the Dakotas or Minnesota, that might make sense. It's starting to get in the proximity of that upper level trough here that we can see. But there's still question marks if this is going to go early. And by early, I mean 4 to 7 p.m. In Illinois, northern Missouri, or northwest Indiana. So some question marks there. I'm going to jump over and show you the HER model. This is the 6Z. We'll get the 12Z in momentarily here, unfortunately, after I record this video. That will come out. And I'm going to take this forecast quickly. Let's do 4 p.m. And you can see supercells already forming portions of west central Texas here, even up near the Red River. And 5 p.m. the HER, it does have initiation way over here in northeast Illinois, kind of toward northwest Indiana near the region, pushing through that area. If this, HER forecast comes to fruition, those early supercells, again, by early I mean like 4 to 6 p.m., would be of pretty significant risk, I would think, for tornadoes, maybe even some hail and wind along that I-80 corridor there. But there's some question marks if they even form, and we talked through that just a second ago. Jump over, let's zoom in a little bit, the 3-kilometer NAM. I mentioned that one took its time forming any of those severe storms. There's an attempt at 3 p.m., but without that upper level wave kind of coming in, it failed. You can see that didn't form into a supercell on the 3-kilometer NAM forecast. Actually, it takes longer into the evening, now 8 p.m., when you have this kind of extended long line of thunderstorms. Now, these could have hail, wind, and tornado associated with them later, but I would think, relatively, comparatively less than if a storm's able to form right along the front, kind of in the late afternoon today. So, interesting forecast split today. Overnight, widespread agreement, heavy rain coming through Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, some thunder associated with that. Tomorrow, as we push into the afternoon, 4 p.m., extended line of thunderstorms from Ohio into Pennsylvania, upstate New York, through Kentucky, Tennessee, and then that actually stretches all the way down into the southern portion of the country. I could jump down to the lower Mississippi, play this forward. Let's get it out into 6 p.m. tomorrow, and that thunderstorm risk area just shifting to the east from where it is today. So the slight risk today, kind of in this corridor here. You can see that translating to the east as we go into the afternoon and evening tomorrow. As a result of that, I just skipped over it. Storm Prediction Center shifts that slight risk area from East Texas all the way up into Pennsylvania, even over toward the kind of DMV area here. We'll see if they upgrade any of these to enhanced. Squall line looked pretty potent kind of in this corridor here, but that thunderstorm risk shifting to the east on Wednesday here. Want to double back and zoom in on that Texas initiation. We kind of looked at it on the dew point, which was not how I wanted to show it. I wanted to show you the actual 3-kilometer NAM forecast. You actually see early supercell trying to form here in central Texas in the afternoon. But again, for the same reason in Illinois, I have to keep an eye on that. Just kind of isolated out in front of everything else. But by evening, strong confidence that we have either kind of a broken line of supercells, strong thunderstorms, maybe forming a line by like 7, 8 p.m. Central Time, eventually pushing through the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area much later in the evening, like well after dinner time, probably bedtime for most folks. And we got to watch out for hail and wind, and can't rule out a tornado as well. Comparatively less tornado threat down in Texas today. A little bit more concerned about that hail and potential wind threat before that weakens overnight. And then we have that reformation tomorrow evening further to the east. Another way we can look at this is something that the Storm Prediction Center uses called the HREF, and what it's doing is running a number of these models. So we just ourselves only looked at 2. We looked at the 3-kilometer NAM, we looked at the HER. Those are pretty good. It's kind of a good start. But they run a number of these models and try to figure out where the strongest storms are going to form. So they run a number of these ensembles, and they show you the probability of where those strong potential supercells are going to end up this afternoon. This is taking us all the way out to like dinner time tonight. And there's much better confidence, like 60% plus confidence that we're going to be forming this show in Texas, already before dinner time. And there's significantly less confidence, even though the HER had that storm coming through I-80 into Indiana this afternoon, a lot of the ensembles don't have that, to the point where we're only like 10 to 20% confident that we're going to have a strong supercell in this area before kind of sunset. And if I take this forecast further out into this evening, now we're after sunset. Now we're getting toward like 9 and 10 p.m. High confidence in Texas, well underway at this point, and now we're starting to get to that 50 to 60% line on I-80, like up into the Chicago area. Probably when either a broken line of storms is coming through, if not a squall line at this point, which will still have a number of severe risks, but is a little bit different than maybe that afternoon storm formation that I was talking about earlier. So interesting day ahead for Illinois. Stay safe. Keep a phone charged on you and on high so you can get some of those directed alerts if you're in these areas here today. Obviously, Texas, much higher confidence. Those storms are going to be forming earlier in the day. In Illinois, we kind of have to watch and wait. I think portions of northern Missouri and northwest Indiana are kind of in the same boat. All right, I want to jump over, look at the more extended forecast after talking about the severe weather. I'm going to play this forecast quickly through. I'm going to just take a peek by 7 p.m. Curiously, the European model, we don't typically look at it too closely for these convective events, but by 7 p.m. it does have maybe a decent storm forming Maybe that's like near Mendota, north of the LaSalle Peru area on the Illinois River. By evening, high confidence in both areas that storms will be through by 1 a.m., pushing into Indiana, portions of Arkansas through central Texas. Actually have a little bit of snow on the back side of this low through the Dakotas up into Minnesota. Wisconsin, we need snow in that area here, I would think, before the season gets underway. So we'll take a look at that forecast just a bit here. Rain forming overnight. We talked about the higher confidence through the Midwest, getting a decent rainfall. By tomorrow afternoon, that severe threat shifting east. We can see that from the ECMWF. We also can see another shortwave coming on shore over in the Pacific Northwest. I actually kind of caught that when we were looking at the dew points earlier, and this is kind of neat, at least if you're me. All right, I'm playing this dew point forecast. We looked at that swoosh of dry air pushing all the way onto the Gulf Coast, but watch this over here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm looking like right here. You'll notice like Wednesday evening into Thursday morning, there's this like surge of dry air. It looks cold on the color bar, but that's really dry air coming into like the Cascades in the Pacific Northwest. And what's happening is you have a shortwave trough, which is essentially just a pocket of cold and dry air aloft, up in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. It's catching on the kind of coastal ranges here, and it's mixing down that dry air to the surface, and it's kind of blasting that Pacific front across the mountainous regions there. You can see that shortwave coming in. So we know that's a shortwave just by that presentation. And that's actually our next weather maker as we get a little bit further out. So kind of see, it's cool to see it on the dew point there. All right, I'm going to play this forecast further out. You can see the heavier rain coming through the Willamette Valley, Portland area. There's that shortwave trough now Thursday morning. Potential snow event, Canadian Prairie. You can see precipitation in western Montana. That skirts through as a kind of classic Alberta clipper here in March. Snow coming through Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, transitioning to rain here along the Twin Cities area over toward Lake Madison. That scoots through on Friday. Still raining in the Pacific Northwest. We still have precipitation falling northern Idaho, portions of eastern Washington, and western Montana. That forms yet another one of these almost clipper-like systems. That's this weekend now, Saturday night into Sunday. Snow across Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas. Again, we'll take more of it. See, again, that rain-snow line forming kind of south of the Twin Cities this weekend, further south near Madison, and then all rain to the south thereafter. And then that rain event pushing through the eastern U.S. on Monday. And then after that, it gets a little bit crickets, as we say, as that kind of high dome and that heat sets up over the southwest. Kind of all the weather just rotates around it as it looks stronger and stronger in the forecast here. Eric talked about that yesterday. If we look at that kind of dome of that lack of precipitation here, just looking at the probabilities that we stay under a half inch for any given area, well, when we start out the forecast, that's 100% because we don't have any active rainfall except what's occurred here overnight in Alabama and Georgia. But if I'm going to take this forecast forward, okay, here's all that severe weather that we talked about, the rain, some of that snow through Canada. Here comes the shortwave this weekend. Talked about Montana getting out on that rain, portions of the Canadian Prairie stretching across into that snow. Across the northern U.S. You can see that there this weekend. There's that another system comes through on Monday. You almost can't see it. And then we just get further out into the forecast and we don't peel back the dry area here. It's almost like building all the way over toward like past the 100th meridian and even probably pushing into Texas. They obviously have rain in the forecast over the next 24 to 48 hours. But beyond that, this dome is looking impressive. And you can see some dryness even extending into the Gulf here as well. So we have to keep an eye on that. Temperature-wise, I'll play this forecast forward. This is the daily anomalies from the ECMWF ensemble. Warm here today and then across the east tomorrow. That cold front swings through on the back side of the severe system, bringing temperatures down kind of mildly. But we warm up after that. We're kind of waiting on a stronger cool down behind those weekend short waves that come through, bringing that snow to the upper Midwest, the northern plains, Montana. Much colder air now on the backside of that system on Monday, and that brings that middle of March cold air shot that we had advertised a little bit earlier this month, bringing temperatures well back down below freezing for the Midwest. Still that time of year when we do freezes pretty regularly. The heat stays to the southwest. You're talking like 90s. Could we push up into the triple digits already in the southwest? I think that's possible. Certainly you're talking like 70s and 80s for portions of California. And that cold air kind of dominating early next week. In the eastern U.S., before that dome, look at that heat stretching all the way from like Sacramento over towards central Kansas and Oklahoma City. and even kind of dominating east of there as well. So that warmth and that dry air sticking in that third week of March. You can see it maybe flattening out a bit to allow some more systems to come through later in the month of March. Got to keep a close eye on that. So we are worried about some like long-term drought concern there. If I actually pull up low temperatures for Tuesday morning at 7 a.m., probably the coldest kind of time period for much of the central and eastern part of the country will be then and thereafter. And you're back out in the teens for a wide area of the Midwest, if not the low 20s. Negatives up in Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, where that snow is coming through. You can see that pushing to the east later next week, but warming up after that. So I wanted to show you that shot of winter coming through. This Climate Prediction Center, their 8 to 14-day temp outlook. Not a surprise here, much warmer for the Southwest. That dominant dome stretching all the way over to the central U.S. up into the Pacific Northwest. Colder across portions of the Great Lakes and New England. But precip-wise, continuing to see that dominant, I'm calling it like a heat dome, if you will, that high here, keeping the precip on the periphery, even into like the lower Mississippi Valley. It's an impressive kind of March high parked over the Southwest here. And what this will also do is probably clear the Gulf out. So not talking nearly as much severe weather in the third, maybe even the fourth week of March. Now, this is kind of a curious pivot point because when we looked at a lot of the California forecasts for March in the analog years, we noticed that some of those concerning dry years, strangely, California went wet in March. And the reason for that, if you have a lot of strong systems coming into the Pacific here, bringing this area wet, keeping a lot of snow, miracle Marches, you're cooling the water over here off the coast. And we know that cold water, especially kind of in spring and early summer, can be a drought concern here. And a sort of yin-yang. What goes down, what's cold here goes up and is warm here, hot and dry later in the year. So, unfortunately for California, unfortunately for the West, where we need better snowpack, part of me is thinking, well, this is maybe playing closer to the playbook Eric talked about at the end of his video yesterday with there's just so much warmth in the North Pacific. I think it's going to be hard to build in a lot of drought, even though we still have that forecast kind of lingering there, the elephant in the room, the latest NMME summer forecast with all this upper Midwest kind of dry concern. Now, another thing that has me less concerned about this is the snow forecast. I hadn't even pulled up a snow forecast yet, but I wanted to do that. Let's do over the next 48 hours here through Thursday. So you're getting some measurable snow down, Twin Cities, northern Wisconsin, eastern South Dakota. Another shortwave clipper comes through. Montana, portions of the Canadian Prairie, plenty for the Cascades. We'll take it. Sunday, there comes another system through, Sunday into Monday. Now you're talking a good swath of snow, up over 4 to 5 inches, maybe up even close to a foot in a number of areas here. I know that rain-snow transition kind of near Rochester and south. And I played this forecast out, and a few more clippers coming through. So we do have snow coming into this area here, and that will lessen my concern because part of this NMME drier risk seasonally, I can almost assure you, is because of the snow drought that we saw build into the northern plains portions of the upper Midwest. They're resolving the lack of soil moisture that might come about later this spring and early summer from that lack of snow. But these deficits are like about a foot off. And I'm looking at a forecast here over the next 10 days that's showing me, at least in this quarter here, about a foot of snow, bringing us back to average, on the winter. Areas a little bit further to the west, like Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming this quarter here, missing out on some of that. But this is needed moisture. And I think the models are going to adjust for that when we do get it in, if this forecast delivers as I expect it to. Last thing I'll mention here is the sea surface temperatures. I mentioned not seeing, at least by mid-March, any wild cooling here in the East Pacific. That is kind of a corridor that we're going to continue to watch. There's some here in the Gulf of Alaska, a little bit here east of Hawaii, but La Nina is all but gone at this point, and El Nino almost assuredly at this point on the way. I won't talk too much about that because we just have kept mentioning it. We've seen how quickly this La Nina has weakened, and I'm curious to see the CPC update for the month of March, which should come out pretty quick here. As for today, thanks for watching. Eric will talk with you all on Wednesday.